Welcome to Persia. Today, we know it as Iran. But this name is a newcomer to these lands. It was first used by outsiders some 2,500 years ago, a word that would eventually evolve to Persia in English. But to understand where this name came from, we must go further back, much further, to the very roots of this civilization. For our starting point, let us travel to the Zagros Mountains in western Iran. Here, overlooking the plains of Mesopotamia, sit the tallest peaks of the tallest mountain range in Iran. These mountains are ancient witnesses to the dawn of civilization. And here, in the Zagros, we find some of humanity's earliest roots. In the Neolithic period, around 8000 BC, humans settled in these foothills. They cultivated crops, raised livestock, and established villages. Among them, the earliest known city in the world, Zoroastrianism, thrived right here in the shadow of these mountains. Then came Elam, one of the oldest civilizations we know. Emerging around 2800 BC, it would exist for over 3,000 years, leaving behind magnificent royal tombs like this one at Chagazanbil. But the name Persia did not appear in these early days. It was a term that would emerge later when outsiders began to venture into this region. So let us turn our attention to those wanderers. Two groups coming from afar, the Greeks and the Romans, would leave their mark on the name and history of this land. But for now, let us focus on the Greeks. In the 6th century BC, they first coined the term Persis, which evolved into Persia. They applied this name to the region inhabited by the Persians, a people who had united much of Iran and posed a growing threat to their empire. The Persians, in fact, had been quietly building their own power. First as a small tribe, and then as a mighty empire led by Cyrus the Great. By the time Alexander the Great arrived in the mid-6th century BC, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. It encompassed a vast array of cultures and peoples. Yet, despite its size and diversity, the empire was remarkably stable and prosperous. This was partly due to the introduction of the concept of zero and the development of the world's first postal system. But it was also due to the empire's unparalleled religious tolerance. Cyrus famously issued a declaration at the city of Cyrus, which many believe to be the first charter of human rights. He proclaimed religious freedom within his empire, an idea so revolutionary that it would echo through the ages. However, the good times would not last. After Alexander the Great's conquest, Persia fell into the hands of his generals. The Seleucids ruled over Persia for a while, but never really controlled it. The eastern parts broke away under local governors who set up their own dynasties, such as the Parthians and the Sassanids. But it was the Sassanids who would play a pivotal role in shaping the future of Persia. Under kings like Shapur I, the empire grew to rival the Roman Empire in size. It was during the Sassanid era that Zoroastrianism, one of the world's earliest monotheistic religions, became the official state religion. This had a profound impact on not only the cultural landscape of Persia, but also the world, laying the groundwork for later Abrahamic faiths. Zoroastrianism's emphasis on the battle between good and evil, heaven and hell, and the concept of judgment after death were revolutionary ideas that would shape theological debates for centuries. Moreover, the Sassanid kings actively promoted learning. They built libraries, encouraged scholarship, and translated ancient texts. This golden age of scholarship laid the foundation for the Islamic Golden Age that would flourish in the centuries to come. Persia, however, was caught in the crossfire of the Roman Sassanid Wars, and when the Muslim Arab armies arrived in the 7th century, they quickly conquered Persia. Soon, the Arabic language and Islam were imposed on the population. Yet the Persians did not vanish. They adapted. They adopted Islam and began to blend their culture with that of the Arabs, a process that would culminate in what is today known as Persian Islam. Throughout this period, Persians held influential positions in the Abbasid and later the Safavid courts, but their cultural distinctiveness persisted. They continued to speak their own language, practice their own customs, and even influenced the course of religion. One of the most notable contributions of Persian culture during this time was the creation of mystical Islam, also known as Sufism. This reform movement sought a deeper, more personal understanding of Islam, and it found fertile ground among the Persians. Sufis like Rumi and Hafez became legendary for their poetry and their vision of a more inclusive Islam. With Sufism, Persian culture reached a new zenith, influencing not only Islam but Christianity and Judaism as well. During this time, the Silk Road flourished, linking China, India, Europe, and the Middle East. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Isfahan became hubs of trade and intellectual exchange. And yet, despite this cultural richness, Persia remained politically fragmented. External powers like the Mongols and the Ottomans encroached on its territory. But even under Mongol rule, Persian culture thrived. The great Mongol ruler, Timur, who was of Persian descent, built magnificent monuments like the Gura Emir Mausoleum, a testament to the adaptability of Persian culture. After the collapse of the Mongol Empire, Persia was once again unified under the Safavid dynasty in the 16th century. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in Persian history. Under Shah Abbas the Great, the Safavid Empire reached its peak. In the meantime, colonialism began to cast its shadows over the region. While the Portuguese seized control of the Persian Gulf, the British and Dutch also showed interest in this valuable waterway. Shah Abbas, however, was a shrewd diplomat, and he managed to play these colonial powers against each other, securing favorable trade deals. As the world began to change outside its borders, Persia continued to innovate within. In the 17th century, the brilliant astronomer and mathematician Al-Biruni made significant contributions to fields like trigonometry and physics. His work laid the groundwork for future scientific discoveries. Despite internal conflicts and external pressures, Persia survived the 19th century and emerged on the threshold of the 20th century, still standing in the heart of the Middle East. And thus we come to the modern era. In the 20th century, Persia, renamed Iran in 1935, faced monumental challenges. The discovery of oil transformed its economy, but also brought political turmoil. Foreign powers sought to influence its government and economy. The US and the UK played significant roles in shaping Iran's policies, a legacy that continues to influence Iran's geopolitical stance today. The story of Persia is a tale of resilience, adaptation, and cultural brilliance. Despite being at the heart of major world events and conflicts, it has managed to preserve its distinct identity. Its civilization, one of the oldest in the world, has endured for millennia. Its culture has absorbed influences from Greece to Islam, from the Mongols to colonialism, and yet it still stands vibrantly today. So, as we continue our journey, keep this in mind. The story of Persia is not just a historical narrative. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, a story that continues to unfold in the modern world. Before Alexander the Great, Cyrus the Great, or Darius, there was Elam. Scholars believe that Elam may represent one of the earliest states to emerge in the Zagros Mountains and the western Iranian plateau, ultimately giving way to the Achaemenid Empire, often referred to as Old Persian. Elam's origins are debated. Some scholars believe Elam was established by Mesopotamians moving east. while others argue it arose independently. The truth may lie somewhere in between. During its early days, Elam's capital, Susa, probably functioned as a Sumerian trading colony. However, it quickly took on a life of its own. Over time, Susa became the center of a flourishing civilization that profoundly influenced the cultural and political landscape of the ancient Near East. Though Elam's timeline is uncertain, historians generally place its emergence around the late 4th millennium BC. Elam's growth and prosperity were likely tied to its strategic location at the crossroads of Mesopotamia and Central Asia. Its mountainous terrain, initially seen as a challenge, became a source of strength. The Zagros Mountains provided natural barriers, shaping the identity of the Elamites, who inhabited the region. As Elam matured, it likely adopted cuneiform script, initially used for record-keeping and trade, which then evolved into a literary tool. Elamite, the language of the Elamites, is believed to be unrelated to Akkadian and Sumerian, suggesting a unique linguistic heritage. Around 2700 BC, Elam reached a significant milestone. Its rulers embraced a new title, Kings of Anshon, indicating a growing sense of identity distinct from Mesopotamia. As Elam progressed, it developed into a powerful state, frequently engaging in diplomatic and military activities with its Mesopotamian neighbors. The rise of Elam coincided with a period of Mesopotamian history known as the Early Dynastic Period. During this time, Elam maintained relationships with various Mesopotamian city-states. The establishment of trade networks facilitated cultural exchanges, including the adoption of writing and administrative practices. It was during this era that the Bible tells the story of the Tower of Babel, explaining the origin of multiple languages as a punishment for humanity's ambition. The story is believed to reflect the cultural encounter between the Sumerians and the Elamites. According to Genesis 10:25, Nimrod, the grandson of Noah, founded the city of Babel in Shinar, where people built a tower reaching towards heaven. God, seeing their hubris, scattered them and confused their languages, leading to the end of their shared language and the division of humanity. In addition to its cultural exchanges with Mesopotamia, Elam had contact with the kingdom of Anshon, located in what is now southwestern Iran. The Elamites, inhabiting the Zagros Mountains, had a distinct language and culture, setting them apart from the Mesopotamian civilizations. Despite its strong cultural identity, Elam wasn't always at peace with its neighbors. Conflicts with Mesopotamia over trade routes and resources led to battles. The Elamites, skilled warriors, fiercely defended their territory and interests. As Elam continued to develop, it produced iconic figures like Queen Nekia, celebrated for her wisdom and diplomacy. Her reign marked a golden age for Elam, fostering cultural achievements and territorial expansion. While Elam flourished, other powers loomed in the Near East, including the Assyrians and Babylonians. Elam's strategic position made it a pawn in larger conflicts, caught between the ambitions of these empires. Despite these external pressures, Elam endured. Its mountainous terrain and fierce inhabitants made it challenging to conquer. Even when faced with destruction from neighboring empires, Elam's cultural influence persisted. Elements of Elamite culture, including its language and religious practices, continued to influence the region, leaving an enduring legacy. While Elam eventually faded from the historical record around 500 BC, its impact was profound. Elam represented one of the earliest states to emerge in Iran, shaping the cultural and political dynamics of the ancient world. Its story offers a glimpse into a civilization that laid the groundwork for later Persian empires, demonstrating the rich tapestry of cultures that contributed to the historical narrative of Iran. From the earliest farmers in the Zagros Mountains to the kings of Anshan in Susa, each chapter adds a layer to the complex and enduring story of Persia. Let's discuss Susa and the birth of Elam part. If you've ever played the Civilization video games, you might be familiar with the Persian civilizations of antiquity. You might know them as the first true empire of the ancient Near East, or you might remember their distinctive ziggurat-like pyramids. But did you know that the earliest roots of Persia can be found in the Neolithic period, long before Cyrus the Great or Darius? Long before the empires of the Achaemenids or the Sassanids, the people we call Persians began to emerge. And that brings us to our latest installment of this channel's occasional series, Persia Before Persia. So join me as we look at the first steps toward Persia, the scattered settlements of the 6th millennium BC, and ask how these early villages laid the groundwork for one of the world's first great empires. By the late 5th millennium BC, the land that would become Persia was no longer just a scattering of farming villages, it was now tied into a larger world. At the heart of this transformation was a city that would become legendary in the story of Iran, Susa. Susa sits in what is today's southwestern Iran, near the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. Its location was ideal, close enough to Mesopotamia to connect with the powerful civilizations of Sumer and Akkad, but far enough east to form its own identity. Founded as early as 4395 BC, Susa is among the oldest continuously inhabited cities in human history. At first, Susa appears to have been heavily influenced by the Sumerians. Archaeologists have uncovered artifacts showing close cultural ties. Cylinder seals, pottery, and administrative tablets, all bearing similarities to Mesopotamian styles. It's possible Susa began as a colony or trading outpost of the city of Uruk, the great Sumerian capital. But over time, something changed. Susa developed its own culture, its own traditions, and eventually, its own kingdom. That kingdom would be known as Elam. Unlike the large, flat plains of Mesopotamia, Elam was shaped by mountains, valleys, and highlands. This geography defined the people who lived there, where Sumerians depended on vast irrigation networks and rivers. The Elamites learned to live in more rugged conditions, herding animals, farming narrow fields, and trading with neighbors to make up for what their land lacked. The Mesopotamians gave them the name Elam, but the Elamites may have called themselves something like Halami, literally, the people of the high country. And that distinction, mountain people versus plain people, became one of the defining rivalries of the ancient world. The Elamites were fewer in number than their Mesopotamian neighbors, but they were tough, resourceful, and fiercely independent. For thousands of years, Susa and Elam would stand as both rivals and trading partners of the great powers to the west. It is no exaggeration to say that the struggle between the mountain peoples of Persia and the plains peoples of Mesopotamia is one of the oldest stories in human history. Some historians even draw a line from those early conflicts to the modern Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, a struggle that in some ways echoed patterns set down more than 6,000 years earlier. But what do we really know about the Elamites? Sadly, much less than we'd like. Their writing system, developed around 3200 BC, remains only partly understood. Unlike Sumerian, Akkadian, or Egyptian, the Elamite language seems to have no clear relatives. It stands alone, isolated, a puzzle for linguists. Progress is being made, but for now, many details of their history remain locked away in clay tablets that we cannot fully read. Still, what we do know paints a picture of a culture both unique and influential. Elamite art, for example, shows a fascination with animals. especially dogs and bulls. Where Mesopotamians filled their temples with images of gods in human or hybrid form, the Elamites highlighted creatures of the natural world. Their religion appears to have been polytheistic, centered around nature, fertility, and a mother goddess. Rituals were often conducted outdoors, in groves, or on mountaintops, closer to the forces they worshipped. It was also a tolerant faith, one that willingly absorbed the gods of neighboring peoples. Over time, as Mesopotamian deities grew in power, they were incorporated into the Elamite pantheon. This flexibility would later echo in Persia's most famous religion, Zoroastrianism, which also made use of natural symbolism and elevated places of worship. The Elamites also stand out for their treatment of women. In their art, queens appear alongside kings as equals. This is not something we see very often in ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt. Women in Elam may have held genuine power, both symbolic and political. It's a striking cultural trait, one that seems to have left an imprint on later Persian societies, where women could sometimes wield significant influence behind the scenes. But Elam's history was not peaceful. Its position, straddling the mountains and the plains, meant it was constantly drawn into conflict. Susa was coveted by its neighbors, especially the powerful Sumerians. In fact, Elam holds a grim distinction. It is the loser of the first recorded war in human history. Around 2700 BC, the Sumerians invaded Elam, sacked Susa, and carried off its treasures. Later, under the great conqueror Sargon of Akkad, Susa again fell under Mesopotamian control. Yet, if history shows us anything about Persia, it is resilience. Time and again, Elam bounced back. Despite defeats, despite invasions, it rebuilt, re-emerged, and continued to play a central role in the region. And Susa itself endured. For thousands of years, long after the fall of Elam, long after the rise of Persia's great empires, long even after Alexander the Great marched through the land, Susa remained a living city. In fact, it survived as an inhabited center until it was finally destroyed by the Mongols. Over 5,000 years after its founding, that kind of continuity is almost unmatched in human history. So, in the story of Persia, Elam and Susa are essential. They were not just early neighbors of Mesopotamia, they were the first Persians. The first attempt at organized statehood in this land. Elam may not have conquered the world, but it carved out an identity that would last. From Elam emerged the kingdoms that would become the Achaemenid Empire, the Parthian Empire, and the Sassanid Empire. And each of those powers drew upon the legacy of the first Persians, the mountain people of Elam. If you want to learn more about the ancient world, stay with us for the next episode. To really understand the world of Elam, we can't just focus on kings and wars. We have to look at the everyday life of ordinary people, their beliefs, their art, and how they saw the world. These small details tell us just as much as battle plans and death lists. When it comes to understanding any civilization, language is key. It's the way a people expresses itself, its thoughts, its values, its stories. Unfortunately, when it comes to Elamite language, things get a bit mysterious. Around 3200 BC, the Elamites developed their own script, one of the earliest in the ancient Near East. They wrote on clay tablets, much like the Mesopotamians, but they wrote in a way that looks nothing like Mesopotamian cuneiform. The problem is, we don't know for sure what this language means. Unlike Akkadian, Sumerian, or Egyptian, it doesn't seem related to any language we know today. It's a language isolate, standing alone without clear relatives. This makes understanding their history a bit like reading a book with a dictionary we haven't found yet. Each tablet we uncover is like turning a page, giving us bits and pieces of their world. But the full story remains hidden. Words like king, queen, scribe, and temple have been identified, and we're slowly piecing together the rest. And what's fascinating is that the language seems to have stayed alive for a very long time. Even after Elam was conquered, their language stuck around, mixing with other languages, but never disappearing entirely. Moving beyond words, we can explore the visual language of art. While Mesopotamian art was filled with gods shown as humans or human-animal hybrids, Elamite art often sticks to animals in their natural forms. Dogs and bulls, in particular, seem to hold special significance. They appear again and again in carvings and statues, suggesting a deep connection to the natural world. These weren't just powerful animals, they were sacred. Take, for example, this statue of a bull from the Chaga Zanbil ruins. The bull isn't just an image, it's a symbol of the sacred, a reminder of the importance of the natural world in Elamite culture. When we look closely at these works, we see a culture deeply connected to the natural world, a reverence for animals that sets them apart from their Mesopotamian neighbors. Elamite art wasn't just about the divine, though. It also captured everyday life, showing scenes of hunting, herding, and ritual. It combined the practical with the spiritual, making art an integral part of daily life. But perhaps the most striking aspect of Elamite art is the portrayal of their rulers. Unlike Mesopotamia, where kings were almost always shown as dominant and women were often relegated to the background, Elamite art showed both kings and queens standing side by side, often holding the same scepter or wearing similar crowns. This visual equality suggests that women had a respected position in society, and may have even shared power at times. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This pattern of depicting kings and queens as equals lasted for centuries, appearing in carvings, cylinder seals, and on monumental archways. In the next episode, we'll explore the conflicts and conquests of later Elamite kings. But for now, let's delve into the realm of ideas and beliefs. Elamite religion was a tapestry woven from various threads, each representing a different belief or practice. At its core, it was a polytheistic faith, meaning they believed in many gods. One of the most important was a mother goddess. She was often depicted with a flower crown, symbolizing nature and fertility. But, unlike the great goddesses of Mesopotamia, she wasn't associated with war or destruction. The Elamites also worshipped a pantheon of male gods, each representing various aspects of their world. Simush, for instance, was the sun god, while Indara Upok was linked to mountains and forests. This suggests that for the Elamites, nature wasn't just a backdrop, it was divine. Sacred groves and mountaintops were not just scenic spots, they were places of worship. The Elamites didn't build towering temples like the Mesopotamians. Instead, they created shrines in the open air, blending their religious life with the beauty of the natural world. Furthermore, the Elamites weren't a closed-minded people. They didn't see their own gods as superior to those of their neighbors. Instead, they incorporated foreign gods into their own pantheon. When they interacted with the Sumerians or Achaemenids, they didn't demonize their deities, but welcomed them, recognizing the validity of other faiths. This practice made Elam a melting pot of religions, a place where different faiths coexisted and sometimes merged. This openness would later become a hallmark of Persian civilization, particularly during the time of Zoroastrianism, which also absorbed older traditions into its own teachings. As we continue our journey through the ancient world, remember that every civilization, no matter how powerful, has its own unique blend of art, customs, and beliefs. Understanding these nuances helps us appreciate the richness and complexity of our world's history. Next episode is Elam and its neighbors, war and trade. There is no such thing as an isolated civilization. Even the most hidden village has a neighbor. And for Elam, tucked away in the mountains of the Zagros, its neighbors were not just the villagers over the next hill. They were some of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. But while Elam was sometimes a victim of its location, it was just as often a beneficiary. Now, Elam did not exist in isolation. From its earliest days, it stood at the crossroads of civilizations, balancing between cooperation and conflict with its powerful neighbors. Its geography, nestled in the mountains yet open to the Mesopotamian plains, ensured that Elam was always both a target and a partner. To understand Elam's history, we must explore how it fought, traded, and negotiated its place in a world of rising empires. The first recorded war in human history involved Elam. Around 2700 BC, the Sumerians invaded and sacked Susa, carrying away treasures and leaving behind records of their victory. For the Elamites, this was a painful beginning, but it also marked them as a people important enough to fight. The plains and the mountains were destined to clash, and Elam was at the center of this long struggle. Later, under the rule of Sargon of Akkad, Elam was again conquered. Sargon, one of Mesopotamia's most legendary kings, extended his empire deep into Elamite territory. Susa became part of the Akkadian realm, its rulers forced to acknowledge Mesopotamian authority. Yet, even in these defeats, Elam refused to vanish. Local traditions, the Elamite language, and cultural practices continued, showing the resilience of the mountain people. By the 2nd millennium BC, Elam had regained strength. Around 1100 BC, under the leadership of King Shetrak-Nakunt, it became a formidable power. Shetrak launched campaigns against Babylon, capturing cities and carrying away monumental artifacts as trophies. One of these was the famous Stele of Hammurabi, inscribed with one of the earliest law codes in history. The fact that Shetrak seized and displayed it in Susa reveals Elam's confidence as a conquering power. But Elam's victories never lasted forever. Internal divisions among ruling families often weakened the state. Kings fought against one another, splitting authority and leaving Elam vulnerable. This instability was exploited by Babylonian kings like Nebuchadnezzar I, who reconquered Elam around 1120 BC, the cycle of conquest. Resistance and reconquest defined much of Elam's history. Yet, Elam was not only a kingdom of war, it was also a kingdom of trade. Its position made it a vital link in long-distance exchange networks that connected different parts of the ancient world. Archaeologists have uncovered artifacts in Susa from as far as the Indus Valley Civilization in modern-day Pakistan. These finds include seals and beads, evidence of connections stretching over 1,000 miles. From the east, Elam also had access to resources in Afghanistan and Central Asia. One of the most important was tin, a metal essential for making bronze. In the Bronze Age, tin was as valuable as oil is today. Scarce, highly sought after, and vital for technological progress. Elam almost certainly played a role in moving tin westward to Mesopotamia and even to Egypt. In return, Elam exported its own goods. The Zagros region provided stone, wood, and metals, resources lacking in the flat, irrigated plains of Mesopotamia. This made Elam indispensable to its neighbors. Even when political relations were hostile, trade often continued as both sides needed what the other could provide. This economic role foreshadowed Persia's future. For thousands of years, Persia would serve as a bridge between civilizations, connecting east and west, north and south. The trade routes that passed through Elam eventually became part of the Silk Road. The great artery of commerce that linked Europe and Asia, Elam's blend of conflict and commerce shaped its character. Its people were warriors, tested in battles against some of the most powerful empires of their age. But they were also traders and diplomats, aware that survival required more than fighting. They learned to navigate a dangerous neighborhood by forging alliances, absorbing foreign influences, and finding opportunities in exchange. This dual identity, both a land of resilience and a land of connection, would remain a hallmark of Persia for centuries to come. The Persian Empire itself would later inherit the same balance. Swords and spears on one hand, caravans and roads on the other. By the first millennium BC, Elam's power began to fade. Internal divisions, repeated invasions, and the arrival of new peoples weakened its hold. Yet its cultural legacy lived on, shaping the Iranian world that followed. Even after Elam fell, its language remained in use for administration, showing that Elamite scribes and traditions still carried weight under new rulers. The decline of Elam coincided with the arrival of new forces on the Iranian plateau. Nomadic tribes from the Eurasian steppes, the Indo-Iranians, began to settle in the region. They brought with them new languages, new customs, and new ways of life. Slowly, they merged with the local Elamite population, blending traditions over centuries. This fusion would give rise to the next stage of Persian history. So, as Elam receded, a new chapter began. The mountain people were about to be joined by the steppe people. Out of this meeting would come the Medes and eventually the Persians, who would build empires remembered for millennia. Next episode is The Road to Empire: Aryan Migrations. As Elam's power declined, new peoples entered the Iranian plateau. They came not from the valleys of Mesopotamia or the mountains of the Zagros, but from far to the north, the endless grasslands of Eurasia. These were the Indo-Iranian tribes, sometimes called Aryans, nomads who would transform the region forever. The story of their arrival is part of a much larger migration that swept across Europe and Asia during the second millennium BC. From the steppes north of the Caspian and Black Seas, groups of horse-riding, cattle-herding peoples began moving outward in all directions. Some went west into Europe, carrying the seeds of what would become Greek, Latin, and Celtic cultures. Others turned east toward India and Iran. And by around 2000 BC, Indo-Iranian tribes were making their way into the Iranian plateau. They were not empire builders in the beginning. They lived as semi-nomadic herders, moving with their flocks, relying on horses, and worshipping gods tied to the sky, fire, and natural forces. Their way of life resembled that of later peoples from the steppe, such as the Scythians, Turks, and Mongols. At first, they coexisted with the older Elamite populations. The process was slow. Not a sudden invasion, but a gradual blending of cultures. Over centuries, Indo-Iranians settled in different parts of the plateau, mixing with local communities. In the south, Elamite traditions remained strong, while in the north and central regions, the newcomers left a deeper mark. One of the most important contributions of the Indo-Iranians was their language. They spoke an early form of the Indo-European family, which over time evolved into Old Persian, Median, and related dialects. These languages would eventually replace Elamite as the dominant tongues of the region, shaping the linguistic foundation of Iran for millennia. The Indo-Iranians also brought with them new religious ideas. Their faith centered on a pantheon of gods associated with natural forces. Rituals involved fire, sacrifice, and the veneration of elements like the sun and the sky. Many of these traditions would later influence Zoroastrianism, the great religion of Persia, which emerged out of this cultural fusion. Economically, the newcomers were different from the Elam. They were skilled in horse husbandry and relied heavily on livestock, but they also adapted to farming once they settled in fertile areas. This combination of pastoral and agricultural traditions gave them flexibility, a trait that proved valuable in a land of mountains, deserts, and valleys. Politically, these tribes were not united. Each clan or group had its own leaders, and power was scattered. But over time, certain groups began to dominate. Among the most significant were the Medes, who settled in the northwestern part of Iran. From their base in the mountains, they would eventually unite much of the plateau under their rule. The blending of Elamite and Indo-Iranian traditions was not a simple replacement, but a fusion. Elamite administrative practices, writing, and art continued for centuries, even under new rulers. In fact, Elamite remained a key language of administration long after Indo-Iranians became politically dominant. This shows that while new tribes brought strength and energy, they relied on the older Elamite systems to govern. The Iranian plateau during this period was a mosaic. In the south, Elamite culture lingered. In the north, Medes and other Iranian groups rose in strength. Across the land, trade connected these communities to Mesopotamia, India, and Central Asia. It was a time of transition, when the old world of Elam and the new world of the Iranians coexisted. This transitional era laid the groundwork for empire. The steppe nomads, who became farmers and rulers, combined with the administrative skills of the Elamites, created a culture both tough and adaptable. It was a culture capable of resisting invasions, absorbing influences, and eventually projecting power outward. By the 8th century BC, this process bore fruit. The Medes began forging alliances, uniting tribes, and resisting the domination of the Assyrians. The brutal empire that had long oppressed the region. The stage was set for the first true Iranian empire, one that would challenge Mesopotamian power and prepare the way for the Persians themselves. The road to empire was not simple or quick. It was the product of centuries of migrations, adaptations, and cultural blending, from the mountains of Elam to the grasslands of the steppe, from farmers to herders to rulers. The peoples of Iran were shaping a civilization that would one day stand at the center of the world. Next, we will turn to the Medes, the first Iranian people to build a kingdom strong enough to rival the great powers of Mesopotamia, and the ones who set the stage for Persia's rise. Next episode is the Medes. Persia unites... By the 8th century BC, the Iranian plateau was no longer just a land of scattered tribes and fading Elamite kingdoms. New groups of Indo-Iranian peoples had taken root, and among them, one rose to prominence: the Medes. From their mountain homeland in northwestern Iran, they would become the first Iranian people to unite the land under a single rule and challenge. The great empires of Mesopotamia, the Medes began as a federation of tribes. They were not immediately an empire in the sense of Assyria or Babylon. Instead, they were a collection of clans, loosely connected, bound together by kinship and common threats. What gave them strength was not a single city or fertile plain, but the rugged mountains that sheltered them, and the determination of their leaders to stand against foreign domination. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, the first great Median ruler was Darius. Around 727 BC, he is said to have united the tribes by establishing law and order. Herodotus tells us that before Darius, the Medes lived in disorder, each village ruled by its own chief. Darius rose above the rest by showing fairness and justice, earning such respect that the people asked him to be their king. He then built a capital city, Ecbatana, surrounded by 7 concentric walls, each rising higher than the last, and each painted a different color. Whether this account is fully accurate is debated by historians. Herodotus often mixed legend with history. But there is truth beneath the tale. The Medes were moving toward unity, and Ecbatana, in modern-day Hamadan, did become their capital. Its strategic location, high in the Zagros Mountains, made it both defensible and central. The Medes grew strong at a time when the Assyrian Empire dominated the Near East. The Assyrians were feared for their brutality, burning cities, deporting populations, and crushing resistance with overwhelming force. For decades, the Medes, like many others, suffered under Assyrian campaigns. But mountain people are not easily broken. In time, the Medes learned from their enemies. They built armies, developed cavalry, and forged alliances. One key moment came under Cyaxares, the grandson of Darius. Around the late 7th century BC, he reorganized the Meden military, creating separate units of infantry, cavalry, and archers. Innovations that made his forces far more effective. Cyaxares also pursued diplomacy, forging an alliance with the rising power of Babylon. Together, the Medes and Babylonians launched a campaign that shook the ancient world. In 612 BC, their combined armies laid siege to Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. The battle was fierce, but the alliance prevailed. Nineveh fell, and with it, the mighty Assyrian Empire collapsed. This was one of the great turning points in history. For centuries, Assyria had been the terror of the Near East. Now, it was gone, brought down in part by the mountain tribes who had once been its victims. With Assyria's fall, the Medes expanded their territory. They controlled much of Iran, parts of Anatolia, and even reached into northern Mesopotamia. Their empire stretched wide, though it remained less centralized than later Persian empires would be. Instead of imposing uniform rule, the Medes often governed through local kings and alliances, maintaining a loose but effective hegemony. The Medes also played a crucial role in shaping the culture of the plateau. By uniting the Iranian tribes, they created the foundation for a shared identity. They introduced new political structures, military organization, and a tradition of resistance against foreign empires. These would all be inherited and expanded by the Persians who followed. Yet, despite their achievements, the Medes are often remembered only as the forerunners of Persia. Part of the reason is that their empire was relatively short. Within little more than a century of uniting the tribes, their dominance was challenged by one of their own allies, the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great. Still, the Medes deserve recognition as the first Iranian power to stand on equal footing with Mesopotamia's great kingdoms. They were the ones who proved that the peoples of the Iranian plateau could not only defend themselves, but could also conquer and rule. Their fall to Cyrus was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of something greater, the creation of the Persian Empire. When Cyrus rose, he did not destroy the Medes completely. Instead, he absorbed their kingdom, their traditions, and their capital into his new empire. The Persians inherited from the Medes both their political framework and their vision of unity. In this way, the Medes lived on in Persian greatness. The story of the Medes reminds us that even those overshadowed by later empires play a critical role in shaping history. They were the bridge between Elam's ancient kingdoms and Persia's world empire. They proved that Iran could stand as a center of power, not merely a land to be conquered. And by uniting under Darius and Cyaxares, by defeating Assyria, and by paving the way for Cyrus, the Medes ensured that Persia's destiny as a global power could finally begin. Next episode is the rise of the Achaemenids. Stay tuned. With the Medes uniting much of the Iranian plateau, the foundations for empire had been laid. But the true dawn of Persia as a world power came not under the Medes, but under a new dynasty. The Achaemenids, their greatest leader, Cyrus the Great, would transform Persia from a collection of tribes into the first global empire in history. Let's get into it. The Achaemenid dynasty took its name from a semi-legendary figure, Achaemenids, an early chieftain of the Persian people. These Persians lived further south than the Medes, in a region called Persis, near modern Fars province. For a time, they were vassals of the Medes, small compared to their powerful northern cousins. Yet, in 559 BC, a young Persian prince named Cyrus II rose to power, and history would never be the same. At first, Cyrus ruled as a subordinate to the Medes. But around 550 BC, he rebelled against his overlord, the Median king Astyages. According to later accounts, Astyages' own troops defected to Cyrus during battle, handing victory to the Persians. In a single stroke, Cyrus overturned the balance of power. The Medes were absorbed. Their capital Ecbatana became Persian, and Cyrus emerged as the ruler of a united Iranian plateau. What made Cyrus extraordinary was not only his military success, but his vision of empire. Many conquerors have risen through history, but few built what Cyrus created. A vast, multi-ethnic empire held together not by terror alone, but by tolerance, pragmatism, and respect for local traditions. His first great campaign was against the wealthy kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor, ruled by King Croesus, famed for his wealth. Around 547 BC, Cyrus defeated Croesus and seized his capital, Sardis. With this victory, Persia gained control over much of Anatolia and the valuable trade routes connecting it to the Mediterranean. Next, Cyrus turned eastward, expanding into Central Asia. He subdued tribes in modern-day Afghanistan and extended Persian influence all the way toward the Indus Valley. This secured resources, manpower, and control over trade routes, linking east and west. But perhaps Cyrus' most famous conquest came in 539 BC, when he marched into Mesopotamia and captured Babylon, the jewel of the ancient world. Babylon was one of the richest and most revered cities of its time, a place of monumental temples, palaces, and learning. Many rulers had tried to control it, but few had done so with the grace of Cyrus. Instead of plundering the city, Cyrus entered as a liberator. He respected Babylonian traditions, restored temples, and allowed the people to continue their way of life. The most famous example of his policies was the Cyrus Cylinder, often called the First Declaration of Human Rights. In it, Cyrus proclaimed that he had freed captive peoples and allowed displaced communities to return to their homelands. Among those freed were the Jews, exiled in Babylon. Cyrus permitted them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, an act that earned him lasting respect in Jewish tradition. By the end of his reign, Cyrus had created an empire stretching from Anatolia and the Aegean Sea in the west, through Mesopotamia, across Iran, and deep into Central Asia. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen. Yet it was not merely its size that made it remarkable, but its organization. Cyrus pioneered the system of satrapies, provinces governed by satraps, or governors, who were often local leaders loyal to the king. This allowed diverse peoples to retain a degree of autonomy while still contributing to the empire. Rather than imposing a single language, religion, or culture, Cyrus allowed each region to maintain its own traditions, as long as they acknowledged Persian rule and paid tribute. This approach contrasted sharply with the brutal tactics of the Assyrians, who had ruled by fear and mass deep. Cyrus showed that empire could be built on inclusion rather than destruction, and in doing so, he created a model that later empires would seek to imitate. Cyrus himself became a figure of legend. To the Greeks, he was the ideal ruler, wise, just, and courageous. To the Persians, he was the father of their nation. Even his death around 530 BC, during a campaign against nomadic tribes in Central Asia, did not tarnish his reputation. He was buried in a simple but elegant stone tomb at Pasargadae, which still stands today as a symbol of his enduring legacy. The rise of the Achaemenids under Cyrus the Great marked a turning point in world history. Persia was no longer just a land of mountains and tribes. It was now a superpower, a state that stretched across continents, linking peoples and cultures under one rule. But the Achaemenid story did not end with Cyrus. His successors, including Cambyses II and especially Darius I, would expand and refine the empire even further, building roads, palaces, and administrative systems that turned Persia into a model of ancient governance. Cyrus had lit the torch. The Persians would carry it forward, creating an empire that would shape the course of history for centuries. Next, we will see Persia and the world. From Greece to India. When Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Empire, he created something the world had never seen before. A multi-ethnic empire that stretched across continents. But it was his successors who would carry Persia to its true height, turning it into the most powerful state on earth. Under kings like Darius the Great and Xerxes I, Persia became a superpower whose reach extended from Greece to India, and whose influence shaped civilizations for centuries. But after Cyrus' death, his son Cambyses II inherited the throne. Cambyses is remembered for his conquest of Egypt in 525 BC. The pharaohs, who had ruled for thousands of years, were overthrown, and Egypt became a satrapy of the Persian Empire. For the first time in history, one empire stretched continuously from the Nile Valley to the Indus River. Cambyses' reign was short, though, and it was Darius the Great, often called Darius I, who truly consolidated and expanded Persia's power. Coming to the throne in 522 BC, Darius reorganized the empire in a way that made it stable, efficient, and durable. He divided his vast realm into around 20 satrapies, or provinces, each ruled by a governor who collected taxes and maintained order. To keep satraps loyal, he appointed royal inspectors, the so-called eyes and ears of the king, who traveled the empire to report directly to him. This balance of local autonomy and central oversight allowed the empire to function smoothly across its enormous territory. To unify such a vast land, Darius invested in infrastructure. He built the Royal Road, stretching over 1,500 miles from Susa to Sardis, allowing messages to travel at remarkable speed. Couriers could cover the distance in just a week, a stunning feat for the ancient world. This communication network made the Persian Empire more connected than any that had come before it. Darius also oversaw the building of magnificent cities. He made Persepolis a ceremonial capital, filled with grand palaces and reliefs depicting representatives from across the empire bringing tribute. These carvings were more than art. They were a statement of empire. A visual reminder that Persia united peoples from every corner of the known world. Religion, too, played a role in Persia's identity. Darius embraced Zoroastrianism, the faith of the prophet Zoroaster, centered on the struggle between truth and falsehood, light and darkness. Zoroastrianism emphasized moral choice and divine order. While Persia tolerated many religions, Zoroastrianism gave the empire a unifying spiritual foundation. But Persia's greatness also brought it into conflict with new rivals. To the west, in the rugged land of Greece, small city-states like Athens and Sparta were rising. Their cultures were very different from Persia's. Fragmented, quarrelsome, but fiercely independent. When the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor revolted against Persian rule, supported by Athens, Darius responded with force. This clash set the stage for the Greco-Persian Wars. In 490 BC, Darius sent his armies across the Aegean, only to be stopped at the Battle of Marathon, where the Athenians achieved a shocking victory. It was a rare setback for Persia, but the struggle was far from over. After Darius' death, his son Xerxes I launched a massive invasion of Greece in 480 BC. He assembled one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen and bridged the Hellespont with floating pontoons to march his forces into Europe. At Thermopylae, a small Spartan force famously held the Persians at bay before being overwhelmed. Though a heroic tale for the Greeks, it was only a small delay in Persia's vast campaign. Yet the Greeks struck back at sea. At the Battle of Salamis, the smaller but more maneuverable Greek fleet destroyed much of Xerxes' navy. A year later, at Plataea, the Persians were defeated on land. Xerxes retreated, and Persia's attempt to conquer Greece ended in failure. For the Greeks, these wars became the stuff of legend. Tales of freedom against tyranny, of citizen soldiers defying an empire. For Persia, however, Greece was a minor frontier, a small corner of its immense domain. While the Greeks celebrated their victories, Persia remained the superpower of its age, ruling over Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and beyond. Even in defeat, Persia influenced Greece. Contact with Persian wealth, art, and ideas left a deep mark on Greek culture, and in turn, Greek admiration and rivalry with Persia shaped their own identity. The encounter between Persia and Greece was not just a military conflict, it was a cultural exchange that would echo through history. To the east, Persia maintained dominance as well. The empire reached into the Indus Valley, connecting Indian civilizations with the wider Near East. Through Persia, goods, technologies, and ideas flowed across Asia, from Greek philosophers encountering Zoroastrian thought to Indian merchants trading with Mesopotamian cities. At its height, the Achaemenid Empire was truly global in scope. It ruled over more than 40% of the world's population, an achievement unmatched until modern times. It demonstrated how diverse peoples, Egyptians, Babylonians, Jews, Greeks, Indians, could be governed within a single political system. Persia's might would eventually be challenged by new forces, especially in the West, where Greece's victories laid the groundwork for Alexander the Great. But during the reigns of Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes, Persia stood as the center of the world, a bridge between continents, a model of governance, and a superpower that shaped the destinies of nations. In our final segment, we will reflect on Persia's enduring legacy, how its culture, religion, and political systems influenced the world long after its empires had fallen, and how Iran today still carries the echoes of ancient Persia. The Achaemenid Empire eventually fell. In 330 BC, Alexander the Great marched into Persia, defeating Darius III and bringing the great empire to an end. But even in defeat, Persia did not vanish. Unlike so many fallen kingdoms that disappeared into the ruins of history, Persia endured, its culture, language, and identity surviving conquest after conquest. This resilience is what makes Persia unique among the world's great civilizations. When Alexander and his successors ruled over Persia, Greek culture flowed into the region. Yet Persia also influenced the Greeks. Their traditions blended to create the hybrid world of the Hellenistic age. When the Parthians rose centuries later, they carried on Persian traditions. Resisting Rome while building new empires on the same plateau, the Sassanid Empire would follow, rivaling Rome and Byzantium, preserving Zoroastrianism, and continuing Persian statecraft well into late antiquity. Persia's legacy is most clearly seen in its religion and philosophy. Zoroastrianism, the faith of fire and light, left deep marks on world religions. Its ideas of a cosmic struggle between good and evil, of heaven and hell, of a final judgment. These would echo in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Even today, concepts that guide billions of people can be traced back to the teachings of Zoroaster and the spirituality of ancient Iran. But the story of Persia is not just about Zoroaster or Cyrus the Great. It's about how the Persian people kept their identity even as they changed and adapted over millennia. They took ideas and customs from those they encountered, but always made them their own. Think of the countless conquerors who tried to erase their mark on Persia: the Mongols, Greeks, Arabs, and even Soviets. Yet through it all, the Persian people held on to their language, their customs, and their soul. For example, take the art and architecture of ancient Persia. It was a beautiful blend of styles from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and their own local traditions. And nowhere is this fusion more evident than at Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire. There, the towering reliefs at the palace tell not just of mighty kings like Darius and Xerxes, but also show the many peoples under their rule. It was a visual reminder of the empire's diversity, a celebration of many cultures coming together under one roof. And then there are the gardens of ancient Persia, places like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, though many scholars now believe they were actually in northern Iraq. Still, these gardens epitomized Persian taste and innovation. They combined elements of nature and geometry, creating spaces of perfect symmetry with flowing water and lush vegetation. This style would influence Islamic gardens in the Middle East and later the magnificent Mughal gardens of South Asia, including the world-famous Taj Mahal. Ancient Persia also had a profound impact on the concept of kingship. The Persian monarchs weren't just political leaders, they were seen as the guardians of cosmic order, a link between the heavens and the earth. They had a duty to maintain balance and harmony, not just within their empire, but in the universe itself. This idea would resonate with later monarchies from the Near East to South Asia, shaping how rulers saw themselves and how their subjects viewed them. And the very word Shah, meaning king, is thought to have originated from ancient Persian, a term that would echo through time, even used today in Iran. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of ancient Persia is the Persian people themselves. Despite being conquered by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, and others, the Persians never really disappeared. They continued to exist, to adapt, to absorb invaders and influence, and then re-emerged. Their language evolved into what we know today as Persian or Farsi, and their traditions, though changed by outside influences, survived, and in some cases, like Zoroastrianism, flourished. When we look at Iran today, we're not just looking at a modern nation. We're seeing the living embodiment of an ancient civilization. Ancient Persia was more than an empire. It was a crossroads of cultures, a meeting point where the East met the West, where empires from Greece to China took notes on governance and trade. It was a place where diversity wasn't just tolerated, it was celebrated. And that legacy lives on in modern Iran. By the late 7th century BC, the Iranian plateau was largely populated by Iranian peoples: the Medes, the Persians, and the Parthians. The Medes were the first to establish dominance. playing a decisive role in the downfall of the Assyrian Empire around 612 BC. But it was another group, the Persians, who would take the lead and forever alter the course of history. At the heart of this transformation was Cyrus II, better known as Cyrus the Great. Originally a vassal of the Median Empire, Cyrus began his rebellion in 553 BC. By 550 BC, he had overthrown the Median king Astyages and absorbed the Medes into his rising state. This was no ordinary power grab. It was the foundation of what would become the Achaemenid Empire, the first Persian empire and the largest the world had yet seen. But how did Cyrus do it? How did a relatively minor power transform into the dominant force of the ancient world? To answer that question, we must go back to the beginning. The circumstances of his revolt remain mysterious. Ancient sources, including Herodotus, tell colorful tales about how Cyrus won the loyalty of Harpagus, a Median general sent to defeat him. Instead of fighting, Harpagus supposedly turned on his master and allied with Cyrus, becoming one of his most trusted generals. Whether through personal ambition, promises of reward, or genuine admiration for Cyrus' leadership, Harpagus' defection sealed the fate of the Medes. From there, Cyrus rose swiftly. By 539 BC, he had conquered Babylon, the greatest city of Mesopotamia. In 533 BC, he extended his reach into the Indus Valley, securing parts of western India. His campaigns were not only about expansion, but about building an empire that was stable, respected, and enduring. And it was here, at the intersection of conquest and administration, where Cyrus' genius lay. He understood that ruling such vast and varied territories required more than just military might. It demanded a structured system that could integrate diverse peoples and maintain control over such a wide area. So Cyrus set about creating one. He established a central administration with governors called satraps, each overseeing a province. To prevent abuse of power, satraps were monitored by a network of royal spies, the so-called eyes and ears of the king. This ensured loyalty while maintaining efficiency across vast territories. Moreover, he standardized weights, measures, and currencies across his empire, further cementing unity and facilitating trade. Yet, despite the introduction of such systematic rule, Cyrus' empire was not one of oppression, but of tolerance and respect. He freed the Jewish people held in captivity in Babylon and allowed them to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. This act of religious sensitivity was not a mere gesture. It was a strategic move to garner support among the diverse populations of his empire. In Babylon, he was seen as a liberator, ending the oppressive rule of Nabonidus. In Persia, he was revered as the father of their nation, uniting disparate Iranian tribes under one banner. His ability to balance strength and respect, to combine military prowess with cultural sensitivity, was the cornerstone of his success. He presented himself not as a god, but as a champion of the gods, a devotee of the great god, Ahura Mazda. He respected local religions and cultures, even adopting elements of them into his own, thus avoiding the pitfalls of cultural imperialism. This approach extended to his treatment of prisoners and conquered cities. He rebuilt the city of Babylon after its siege, demonstrating that destruction was a last resort, not a first option. His military successes were impressive, but rarely matched the brutality of his predecessors. Cyrus led from the front, instilling discipline and precision into the army, forming elite corps like the Immortals, a division of 10,000 soldiers who became the backbone of the Persian war machine for centuries. Yet even in conquest, Cyrus showed restraint, sparing civilian lives and religious sites, an almost unheard-of practice in the ancient world, compared to the sack of Babylon by the Assyrians or the destruction of Carthage by the Romans. His campaigns were remarkably humane. By the time of his death, around 530 BC, Cyrus had forged the largest empire in history up to that point, stretching from the Aegean to the Indus. His tomb at Persepolis, still standing today and recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, remains a testament to his lasting influence. Cyrus' empire was not static. It evolved, adapted, and grew under his successors, Cambyses, Darius, and Xerxes, who would take the Persian kingship to new heights, clashing with Egypt, Greece, and the wider world. Their stories are fascinating, but to fully grasp their achievements, we must first understand the foundations laid by Cyrus the Great, for it was he who, with his unique blend of military skill, administrative brilliance, and surprising tolerance, created the model of empire that his successors would build upon, expand upon, and ultimately take to its glorious peak. Next episode is Cambyses Darius and the expansion of Persia. After the death of Cyrus the Great, the empire passed to his son Cambyses II. Though less celebrated than his father, Cambyses carried the Persian banner further west, striking at one of the oldest and most prestigious civilizations on Earth, Egypt. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched his invasion of the Nile Valley. The pharaoh Psamtik III was defeated at the Battle of Pelusium, where Persian forces are said to have used cats and other sacred animals as shields, exploiting the Egyptians' religious reverence. The conquest was swift. Egypt, Nubia, and parts of modern-day Syria fell under Persian rule, and Cambyses added Pharaoh of Egypt to his long list of royal titles. But Cambyses' reign was short-lived. He died in 522 BC, under mysterious circumstances while returning from campaign. Some accounts say he was thrown from a horse, while others hint at assassination or even madness. What we do know is that his sudden death triggered a period of instability. Claimants and pretenders vied for the throne, and Persia teetered on the edge of civil war. Out of this chaos emerged one of Persia's greatest kings, Darius I, also known as Darius the Great. According to tradition, he seized power with the backing of noble families and quickly set about consolidating his rule. His reign marked a new era of organization, expansion, and monumental achievements. To secure his position, Darius ruthlessly crushed rebellions and reasserted royal authority over the provinces, or satrapies, that stretched from Central Asia to the Middle East and North Africa. At its greatest extent, the Achaemenid Empire ruled nearly half the world's population, a feat unmatched until modern times. To manage this vast territory, Darius divided it into about 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap, a term that evolved into the English word province. This administrative innovation refined the system Cyrus had pioneered, which relied on local customs and allowed subject peoples to maintain their cultural practices, as long as they paid their taxes. Each satrapy was further subdivided into regions that were easier to administer, and the revenues from these provinces, which were taxed according to their wealth, funded the administration, army, and infrastructure of the empire. To ensure no satrap grew too powerful, Darius used a network of inspectors, the famous eyes and ears of the king, who kept constant watch. These inspectors checked the satrap's accounts, heard appeals from subjects, and reported any wrongdoing. Another key to imperial stability was the standardization of weights and measures throughout the empire, facilitated by the introduction of a silver coin minted in the royal workshops that bore the king's stamp and ensured fair exchange. To centralize authority, Darius also established 4 royal capitals: Susa, Persepolis, Ecbatana, and Babylon. Of these, Persepolis became the most iconic, a ceremonial city of grandeur and symbolism. Its massive gates and platforms, designed to impress with their sheer size, still dominate the landscape. Reliefs carved into its walls depicted envoys from across the empire bringing tribute, Egyptians, Indians, Greeks, and Scythians alike. A visual record of the empire's diversity and reach. The heart of the city was the Apadana Palace, a vast structure with a central courtyard surrounded by columns adorned with intricate carvings of the king, receiving delegations from distant lands. Persepolis was not just a symbol of power, but a tool for projecting it. Each year, the king would hold a 3-day reception at Persepolis for ambassadors and rulers from across the known world. It was a chance to display the riches and variety of the empire and remind all who attended of the king's centrality. To knit this vast territory together, Darius built the Royal Road, a highway more than 1,500 miles long, linking Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Iran. Along the way, relay stations supplied fresh horses, food and lodging, allowing messages to travel at unprecedented speed. Couriers could carry a dispatch across the empire in just a week, a marvel of efficiency in the ancient world. He also pursued spectacular feats of engineering. In Shushta, he built a hydraulic system of canals and mills that irrigated nearly 100,000 acres. A testament to the empire's ability to harness the forces of nature for the benefit of its people. Canot systems, ingenious networks of underground canals that tapped groundwater and carried it to fields, were expanded across Persia, transforming the landscape and ensuring agriculture in the face of a harsh climate. Religion played an increasing role in Darius' reign. A follower of Zoroastrianism, the faith that taught the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood, good and evil. He tolerated the religions of his subjects, but Zoroastrian ideas increasingly informed his vision of kingship. Darius came to believe he was chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god, to uphold truth and justice across the empire. This divine mission gave him the right to rule and inspired grand projects like the construction of Susa, where the palace walls were decorated with reliefs showing the king giving justice to those who stood before him. But Darius was not only an organizer, he was also a conqueror. Under his reign, Persia's eastern frontier reached the Indus Valley, today's Pakistan. To the west, he moved into Thrace and Macedon, bringing Persia to the doorstep of Greece. This expansion set the stage for the empire's most famous clashes, the Greco-Persian Wars, when the Ionian Greeks revolted against Persian rule in 499 BC. Darius responded with punitive expeditions that brought his forces into conflict with the Greek city-states. The Persians won early victories and imposed tribute on some cities, but the core of Greece remained defiant. In 490 BC, Darius sent an army to punish the city of Marathon. Though the Persians were initially successful, the Athenians, aided by other Greek city-states, achieved a stunning victory. The loss was a rare humiliation for Persia, and Darius spent the next 6 years planning his revenge. He assembled a massive fleet and raised an army that would bring the war to the Greeks. Darius died in 486 BC before he could carry out his plans, leaving the task to his son, Xerxes I. When Xerxes invaded Greece, his army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. He burned Athens, clashed at Thermopylae, and ended in the legendary battles of Salamis and Plataea. But before we turn to Xerxes' campaigns, it is worth pausing to appreciate what Darius achieved. He turned Cyrus' foundation into a sophisticated empire with infrastructure, administration, and ideology strong enough to endure for centuries. When Darius the Great died in 486 BC, he left his throne, and his unfinished war with Greece. To his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes inherited the largest and most advanced empire the world had ever known. Stretching from Central Asia to the Middle East and North Africa, and even parts of Eastern Europe. His task was to secure its frontiers and avenge the humiliation at Marathon, where the Athenians had defeated Persia a decade earlier. Xerxes was determined to succeed where his father had failed. In 480 BC, he assembled one of the most formidable armies in antiquity. Ancient sources, like Herodotus, speak of hundreds of thousands, even millions of men. Though modern historians estimate around 200,000 soldiers and a vast navy, still, it was a colossal force, drawn from every corner of the empire. Persians, Medes, Egyptians, Babylonians, Indians, and more. To move this army into Europe, Xerxes built 2 pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, linking Asia to Thrace. He also dug a massive canal across Mount Athos to avoid a dangerous sea passage, a rare example of large-scale engineering in ancient warfare. As the Persians advanced, the Greek city-states, usually rivals, were forced into uneasy unity. Athens and Sparta, so often at odds, stood together in the face of invasion. Their alliance would shape one of the most legendary confrontations in history. The first clash came at Thermopylae, a narrow pass in central Greece. Here, a small Greek force, led by King Leonidas of Sparta, confronted Xerxes' vast army. For 3 days, the Greeks held their ground, inflicting heavy losses. Their stand became legendary, a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds. Ultimately, the Persians outflanked the defenders thanks to a traitor's guidance, and Leonidas fell with his 300 Spartans and their allies. Thermopylae was a Persian victory, but it came at a cost that inspired the Greek resistance. With the road to Athens open, Xerxes marched south. The Athenians had evacuated their city, leaving it to the Persians. Xerxes' army entered Athens and burned it, seemingly avenging the insult of Marathon. Yet, the war was not over. Indeed, the turning point came at sea, in the Battle of Salamis. The Persian navy, larger but less maneuverable, entered the narrow straits near Athens. There, the smaller Greek fleet, led by Themistocles, trapped and destroyed much of the Persian force. Xerxes, watching from the shore, saw his navy shattered. The following year, in 479 BC, the Greeks struck again. At the Battle of Plataea, a united Greek army routed the remaining Persian forces. On the same day, at Mycale in Asia Minor, the Greeks defeated the Persians at sea. These twin blows ended Xerxes' campaign and forced Persia to withdraw from mainland Greece. For the Greeks, the wars were a triumph of freedom over tyranny. They became the foundation of Greek identity, celebrated in history and legend. For the Persians, however, Greece was a frontier, not the heart of the empire. Despite the defeats, Persia remained strong, still ruling from Egypt to India. Xerxes himself returned to Persia and focused on grand building projects, including the continued expansion of Persepolis. Yet, Xerxes' reign ended in tragedy. In 465 BC, he was assassinated in his palace by the commander of his bodyguards. The empire he ruled endured, but the dream of conquering Greece was gone. Instead, Persia and the Greek world would remain locked in rivalry for centuries, neither fully dominating the other. But the Greco-Persian wars were more than military conflicts. They were a cultural encounter. East and West meeting on the battlefield, shaping each other's identities. Greece defined itself against Persia, while Persia absorbed Greek influence even in defeat. In the next segment, we will look beyond the wars to the empire's enduring achievements, its irrigation systems, innovations, and the unique place of Persian society, where women enjoyed freedoms rare in antiquity, and where religion, law, and culture blended into a model that shaped civilizations to come. Next episode is Persian society, innovation, and culture. While the Persian Empire is often remembered for its great kings and sweeping conquests, it was just as remarkable for the way it organized society and fostered innovation. The empire at its height stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean, encompassing dozens of cultures. Holding together so many peoples required more than military might. It demanded vision and administration. One of Persia's most striking achievements was its approach to governance. Cyrus and Darius created the system of satrapies, provinces governed by local satraps who enjoyed autonomy in daily affairs yet remained loyal to the king. This balance meant the empire could govern immense distances without collapsing into chaos. To ensure loyalty, the so-called king's eyes and ears, royal inspectors, traveled across the empire, checking satraps and reporting directly to the king. It was an early form of accountability, and it worked. Infrastructure was another pillar of Persian strength. The famed Royal Road stretched nearly 1,700 miles, connecting Susa to Sardis. Relay stations along the route allowed couriers to change horses, rest, and continue with fresh speed. Messages that might take months in other empires could be delivered in mere days. Herodotus marveled at the efficiency, noting that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night slowed Persian couriers. It was a postal system that would inspire later civilizations, even millennia later. But perhaps even more vital was the fusion of practicality and aesthetics in public works. Persian engineers were equally inventive when it came to survival in their harsh, semi-arid homeland. They perfected the qanot system, underground aqueducts that tapped into water tables and carried life-giving streams to fields and cities. Protected from the sun, these channels limited evaporation and provided a steady flow, regardless of rainfall. Alongside qanots, the Persians built the Shashtar hydraulic system, a marvel of canals, mills, and artificial waterfalls that irrigated tens of thousands of acres. These feats of water management turned dry landscapes into fertile gardens, feeding millions. Yet it was not just about taming the environment. Persian society also nurtured a vibrant culture of art, entertainment, and daily life. They are often credited with refining or even inventing games still played today. Backgammon, chess, and early forms of the guitar, music, and poetry flourished in the royal courts, while elaborate banquets showcased not only Persian cuisine, but also influences absorbed from conquered lands. A society that excelled at logistics and trade naturally produced dazzling goods. Persian carpets, renowned for their intricate designs and vibrant colors, became coveted luxuries across the ancient world. Textiles and metalwork were equally celebrated, adorning homes and bodies with beauty and symbolism. And within this society, women enjoyed freedoms rare for the ancient world. They could own property, run businesses, and travel independently. Aristocratic women were known to ride horses and even practice archery, activities unthinkable for women in Greece at the same time. Though they did not rule, Persian women held influence in both the household and the economy. Another hallmark of Persia was its remarkable tolerance. Unlike the empires that preceded them, the Achaemenids allowed subject peoples to maintain their religions, languages, and customs. This policy not only reduced rebellion, but also encouraged loyalty. When Cyrus allowed the Jews exiled in Babylon to return to their homeland, he was praised in the Hebrew Bible as a liberator sent by God. It was a level of respect for local traditions that distinguished Persia from the harsher rulers of Mesopotamia. Yet this openness did not mean weakness. The empire was multi-ethnic, but it was also tightly knit through a common language, a standardized system of weights and measures, and above all, a shared identity under the great king. Loyalty to the king and the empire was paramount, and that loyalty was rewarded. Local officials and elites who oversaw the collection of taxes and the maintenance of order were given noble titles and granted land, creating a class of loyal, well-to-do subjects. In fact, this combination of strong central rule and local autonomy was so successful that it survived the empire's collapse. When Alexander the Great swept through Persia, he was greeted not only by fierce resistance, but also by delegations of submission. Local elites, eager to preserve their way of life, often welcomed the Macedonian as a liberator from the hated king. Yet once Alexander was gone, those same satraps and governors ruled on their own, setting up successor states that would last for centuries. In the end, Persian society thrived because it was practical, flexible, and inclusive. From engineering marvels to cultural achievements, from women's rights to religious tolerance, Persia built an empire that was as much about people as it was about power. It was this combination, conquest tempered by innovation and respect, that ensured its endurance and left a legacy admired long after its fall. No discussion of Persia would be complete without exploring its spiritual heart. Zoroastrianism, long before Christianity, long before Islam, Persia produced one of the world's earliest monotheistic faiths, a religion that shaped the ideas of heaven and hell, angels and demons, good and evil, for centuries to come. The prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, is a shadowy figure. Tradition places him in the 6th century BC, but some historians argue he lived as early as the 10th century BC. His teachings arose among the Iranian tribes and transformed their ancient animist and polytheistic practices into something profoundly new. At the center of Zoroastrian belief is Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light and wisdom, locked in eternal struggle against Angra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness and chaos. Unlike some later religions, Ahura Mazda is not omnipotent. Humanity, through its choices, tips the balance between good and evil. The moral order, called Asha, emphasizes truth, justice, and righteousness. Each person is seen as having free will, accountable for their deeds in life and their fate after death. Now, hold on a minute. This idea of an all-good deity locked in a cosmic battle with an evil spirit, it sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? We've heard echoes of it in later faiths. But remember, Zoroastrianism came first. Its vision of the afterlife was also strikingly advanced. Souls were judged after death as they crossed the Chinvat Bridge. The righteous found it wide and easy, leading to paradise. But the wicked found it narrow and plunged into torment below. These concepts of heaven and hell, judgment, and even the end-time renewal of the world, they all found echoes in Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam. Now let's talk about worship. Zoroastrianism was centered on fire, a symbol of purity and the divine. Fire temples became sacred spaces where priests, known as magi, tended eternal flames. These magi weren't just religious figures, they were renowned for their wisdom, astronomy, and rituals. In fact, the three wise men who appear in the Christian nativity story, the Magi, are thought to have been Zoroastrian priests. Ahura Mazda wasn't the only deity in the Zoroastrian pantheon. There were other divine beings. Amisha representing ethical and natural forces. They served as intermediaries between humans and the supreme god. Some of these divine beings took on more prominent roles. For example, one Spenta, initially seen as a benevolent spirit, evolved into a more independent figure, eventually becoming synonymous with Zoroaster himself. And another, Mithra, originally an aspect of Ahura Mazda, also became a prominent deity, especially revered for his role in creating the covenant between gods and humanity. What's more, Zoroastrianism encouraged respect for nature. Water, earth, and fire were seen as sacred, to be protected and kept pure. This attitude likely derived from older animist traditions. It gave Persia an ethos of stewardship that stood out in the ancient world. Now, the Persian kings, they saw themselves as champions of Zoroastrian ideals, but they never forced the religion on their subjects. Cyrus, Darius, and their successors ruled an empire of many religions and peoples. Zoroastrianism served as the moral and cultural backbone of Persia, not as an instrument of oppression. Instead, the Persians built one of the world's first great houses of worship to show tolerance towards other religions. During the Achaemenid Empire, travelers like the Greek historian Herodotus marveled at the breadth of religious practice within the Persian Empire, noting how each group was left to worship according to their own beliefs. Even the famed tomb of Cyrus, which predates the rise of Zoroastrianism, demonstrates this early concept of religious tolerance. So what happened next? How did Zoroastrianism evolve and spread? Well, despite its profound influence, Zoroastrianism never had mass appeal. By the time of Christ, most Persians still practiced some form of polytheism. The faith did find followers outside Persia, though, carried by missionaries like Zoroaster's son, who traveled to Central Asia and even reached India, where the religion took root in the western region of Gujarat. Here, the Parsis, as they're known, still keep the faith alive. Today, there are around 200,000 Zoroastrians worldwide, with around half of them living in India. Though the Arab conquest diminished Zoroastrianism's reach in the 7th century CE, it never disappeared. The faith continued to thrive in India, shielded by the tolerant policies of the various empires that ruled there. Meanwhile, in Persia, Zoroastrian ideas continued to resonate. During the Sassanid period, it experienced a revival, deeply influencing the monarchy. The last Sassanid king, Yazdegerd III, was deeply devoted to Zoroastrianism and appointed a number of magi to influential positions. However, the Muslim conquest of Persia spelled the end of this dynasty and Zoroastrianism's prominence. Many Zoroastrians were killed, some converted, and others fled to Central Asia and India. In essence, Zoroastrianism, despite its universal appeal, remained tethered to Persia's fate. Its rise and fall mirrored the fortunes of its homeland. Yet, its impact extended far beyond the borders of ancient Persia. Its influence can be seen in the Abrahamic faiths, in medieval philosophy, and in the very concept of good versus evil. Zoroastrianism was more than just Persia's religion. It was one of its greatest gifts to humanity, a vision of cosmic struggle, personal responsibility, and ultimate hope. By the 4th century BC, Persia was still mighty, but its throne had grown weaker. Enter a young king from the northern fringes of the Greek world, Alexander of Macedon. Born in 356 BC and tutored by none other than Aristotle, Alexander was groomed from birth to lead. By 16, he commanded armies. At 20, he inherited his father's throne. Philip II of Macedon had already united the Greek city-states under his banner, preparing to lead them against Persia. But his assassination in 336 BC left the task to his son. Alexander wasted no time. He crushed revolts in Greece, razed the rebellious city of Thebes to the ground, and set his sights eastward. His ambition was nothing less than the conquest of the Persian Empire. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with about 50,000 men, a fraction of Persia's manpower, yet disciplined, loyal, and led from the front. The first great clash came at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. Facing him was Darius III, the Persian king, with an army at least twice as large. Yet, in a narrow pass between mountains and sea, Alexander's tactical genius triumphed. Darius fled the field, abandoning even his family to the conqueror. Alexander treated his royal hostages with respect, even marrying one of Darius's daughters later. But he refused to recognize Darius as Persia's legitimate ruler. For Alexander, only total conquest would suffice. He marched south, besieging the fortified city of Tyre. After months of brutal resistance, Alexander's engineers finally broke through the sea walls. He rewarded their efforts by destroying the city. Gaza suffered a similar fate. Egypt, in contrast, welcomed him as a liberator. There, he founded Alexandria in 331 BC, a city that would become one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. Then came the decisive blow, the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Darius, once again commanding a far larger army on open ground, seemed poised for victory. Yet, when the fighting turned, he fled once more. The sight of their king in flight shattered Persian morale. For the first time in history, the mighty empire of Cyrus and Darius collapsed before an invader. Alexander entered Babylon, Susa, and finally Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia. In a fateful moment, much of the city was burned, perhaps as revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens a century earlier, or perhaps by accident. Either way, the flames consumed a symbol of Persian greatness. By 330 BC, Persia was his. Darius III, fleeing east, was betrayed and killed by his own men. Alexander, furious at being denied the satisfaction of capturing him alive, declared himself the rightful king of Asia. He would even pursue Darius's assassins across Central Asia, showing a determination to claim Persia not just by force, but by legitimacy. What made Alexander extraordinary was not only his military brilliance, but his audacity. He led from the front, charging into battle, risking his life alongside his men. This courage inspired fierce loyalty among his troops and exposed the weakness of Darius, whose repeated flights destroyed Persian morale. Some historians argue Persia was already in decline, weakened by corruption or fatigue, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The empire was still rich, vast, and organized. It fell not because it was weak, but because it faced an opponent of unparalleled genius at precisely the wrong moment. Yet, despite its defeat, the Persian Empire was far from finished. Though Alexander had conquered the west, the heartland of his empire remained beyond the river Indus. Meanwhile, back in Greece, his empire was already in peril. Rivals at home and abroad were eager to see how long the new King of Kings could keep his crown. And so, while the ashes of Persepolis still smoldered, Alexander's true challenges were already beginning to stir. Next episode is the Seleucids and Hellenistic Persia. When Alexander the Great died suddenly in 323 BC at the age of just 32, his empire, the largest the world had ever seen, had no clear successor. On his deathbed, he is said to have whispered that rule should go to the strongest. And so, his generals carved his empire into fragments. Persia, the heart of his conquests, fell to Seleucus, one of Alexander's commanders. From this inheritance rose the Seleucid Empire, a Hellenistic dynasty that stretched from Anatolia to the Indus. Though Greek in origin, the Seleucids ruled over a Persian land steeped in ancient traditions. It was a strange twist of history that Greece, a collection of city-states for so long culturally and geographically overshadowed by the great empires of the East, now found itself at the center of the known world. And with it came an influx of Greek settlers who poured into the region, bringing with them the language, customs, and ideals of classical Greece. The biggest of these settlements was the city of Alexandria, which soon became the capital of the Seleucid Empire. Here, and in other cities founded by Greek colonists, the old ways of Persia seemed to fade into the background. As the Greek language became the tongue of administration and scholarship, Greek literature, philosophy, and scientific learning flourished in these urban centers. Meanwhile, the Persian nobility adapted to this new order. They shed many of their traditional customs, intermarrying with the Greek elite and sending their children to be educated in Greek cities. The result was a hybrid civilization, Persian in heritage, Greek in form, a blending that has led some historians to call this era Perso-Hellenistic. This fusion is perhaps most evident in the religion of the age. Despite the efforts of some Greek colonists to impose the worship of the Olympian gods on the Persian lands, traditional practices, including Zoroastrianism, the ancient Persian dualist religion, endured. In fact, the Seleucids generally showed remarkable tolerance towards the religious beliefs of their subjects. This syncretism went beyond mere acceptance. However, Greek gods and rituals spread across the land, too. The cult of the Egyptian goddess Isis, for example, found a home in the Persian heartland. In art and architecture, one could see the blending of East and West. Greek columns rising in Persian palaces, Greek coinage bearing images of rulers who styled themselves heirs of both Alexander and Cyrus. Despite this cultural richness, however, the Seleucids struggled to maintain control over their vast and unstable empire. In the east, they were pressed against by powerful Indian empires. In the west, Rome was rising, while Egypt, under the Ptolemies, remained a bitter competitor for control of the eastern Mediterranean. Moreover, loyalty to the Seleucids inside Persia was thin. The Greeks were seen as foreigners, more Macedonian than Persian, and over time, local dynasties began to assert their independence. By the mid-2nd century BC, the Seleucid grip on Persia had weakened dramatically. Cities and provinces that just a generation earlier had been the heartland of a great empire were lost. In their place, a new power emerged. The Parthians, an Iranian people who would restore Persian rule to the region. Still, the Seleucids' accomplishments should not be understated. In little more than 2 centuries, they spread the Greek language, science, and philosophy deep into Asia. More than that, though they ensured that even as Persia passed from empire to empire, its role as a cultural crossroads only grew stronger. The Seleucids may have ruled for little more than 2 centuries, but their reign made Persia a central stage for the meeting of civilizations. Next episode is the Parthians. As we turn our attention back to the east, the stage is set for a new tale. The once mighty Seleucid Empire is now a shadow of its former self, fragmented and feeble. But out of the steppes and deserts of Central Asia, a new Iranian force is rising. A people known as the Parthians. Hailing from the northeast, they will rise swiftly to take back Persia for its own people and establish a dynasty that will endure for nearly 5 centuries. But who were these mysterious Parthians? How did they conquer the Near East? And what kind of empire did they build? You're watching this channel. The Parthians were horsemen at heart. Their armies relied on swift cavalry and deadly mounted archers. And among their many skills, one tactic became legendary: The Parthian shot, warriors would feign retreat, then turn in the saddle and unleash volleys of arrows at pursuing enemies. By the mid-2nd century BC, the Parthians had overthrown Seleucid rule and established their own dynasty. Soon, they faced a new threat: Rome. In 53 BC, Marcus Crassus, one of Rome's most powerful men, led his legions into Mesopotamia. There, at the city of Carrhae, the Parthians annihilated the Roman army, and Crassus was executed in a gruesome display of Persian triumph. His head cut off and stuffed in a bronze mask, a warning to any who would threaten Parthia. Politically, the Parthians created a system unlike the centralized monarchies of earlier Persia. Their empire was aristocratic. A king ruled, but hundreds of noble families and clans held great power. In fact, they could depose monarchs through a form of council, ensuring no ruler could become too powerful. This gave the empire resilience and stability that prevented the devastating civil wars that often crippled their Roman rivals. Culturally, Parthia became a bridge between worlds. Greek influence lingered from the Seleucid age, but Persian traditions re-emerged strongly. Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian religion, regained importance, though the Parthians were tolerant of many religions. Along the Silk Road, caravans carried silk from China, spices from India, and gems from Central Asia into the Mediterranean world, all passing through Parthian lands. In cities like Ctesiphon, merchants from across the world gathered, traded, and made their fortunes. In art and ritual, too, the fusion of influences was clear. Greek styles mixed with Iranian motifs, producing a unique visual language that would later inspire Sassanid and even Islamic art. One symbol of this blending was the cult of Mithra, a Persian deity whose worship spread westward. He was first a local god of light and sky, but evolved into a supreme deity in a mystery religion that became hugely popular in the Roman world. For Rome, however, Parthia remained the eastern rival. Wars flared again and again. With neither side able to destroy the other, the Euphrates River became the frontier between two superpowers, each wary of the other's strength. Though the Parthians were not conquerors on the scale of Cyrus or Darius, they were survivors. They endured, adapted, and kept Persia independent against one of the greatest empires in history. In doing so, they set the stage for the next Persian dynasty, the Sassanians, who would once again raise Persia to imperial greatness. Next episode is In 224 AD, the Parthian dynasty gave way to a new Persian power, the Sassanids, born from a noble family in the heartland of Persia. The Sassanids saw themselves not as heirs of Greek conquerors or nomadic warlords, but as true successors of Cyrus and Darius. With them, the flame of classical Persian culture roared back to life. We'll be exploring the rise and fall of the Sassanid Empire, one of the most important powers of late antiquity. If you're ready to get those brain cows milked, let's get to it. The Sassanids built a centralized and disciplined empire. Unlike the looser, aristocratic rule of the Parthians, the Sassanid monarch was supreme. Zoroastrianism became the official state religion, its priests wielding immense influence alongside the crown. Fire temples burned across the empire, and the king was seen not only as a ruler, but as a divine figure charged with upholding cosmic order. Culturally, this was a golden age. Sassanid art, architecture, and literature flourished, laying foundations that later Islamic civilization would inherit. Monumental palaces rose at Ctesiphon and Firuzabad, with sweeping domes and arches that inspired later builders from Byzantium to Baghdad. Silver plates, textiles, and intricate reliefs depicted kings hunting lions, riding to battle, and ruling with divine authority. The Sassanids also presided over a time of intellectual and religious ferment. They generally tolerated Jews and Christians within their borders, though at times tensions flared. From Persia, the prophet Mani proclaimed a new faith, Manichaeism, claiming to unify the teachings of Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus. His religion spread widely, only to be persecuted and eventually destroyed, though it left echoes in later Gnostic and Christian thought. Economically, the empire thrived on trade. Persia sat at the heart of the Silk Road, linking Rome and later Byzantium with India and China. Goods, ideas, and technologies flowed through Persian lands, enriching its cities and making its rulers powerful brokers between East and West. But it was in war that the Sassanids made their most lasting mark. For 4 centuries, they stood as the great rival of Rome, and later the Byzantine Empire. From Armenia to Mesopotamia, their armies clashed in endless campaigns. Sometimes the Persians triumphed, even sacking Roman cities and threatening Constantinople itself. At other times, they fell back before Roman legions. Neither side could destroy the other, and their rivalry defined the geopolitics of late antiquity. Yet, by the early 7th century, endless war with Byzantium drained the empire. When the Prophet Muhammad began uniting the Arab tribes, both Rome and Persia were weakened by decades of conflict. For the Sassanids, the timing was fatal. Civil war, plague, and invasion left them vulnerable. By 651 AD, the last Sassanid king was killed, and Persia, after more than 1,000 years of imperial greatness, fell to the armies of Islam. Still, the Sassanid legacy endured. Their culture, religion, and governance left a profound imprint on the Islamic world. The Abbasid caliphs would later adopt Persian court rituals, administration, and architecture. Even in defeat, Persia continued to shape the destiny of civilizations. Next episode is Persia and the Rise of Islam. The year is 1986. You are watching television. The host of the news program you're watching is famous for his eccentric rants about politics. And today, he's ranting about something called the clash of civilizations. According to him, the modern world is divided into warring civilizations. The West versus the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But after 1991, just the West versus everybody else. The world is indeed divided into civilizations. And it always has been. It's just that most of the time we don't notice. Consider the year 636 AD. In the Arabian Peninsula, a new religion is sweeping across the desert, preaching a message of submission to one God. Its followers, the Muslims, have risen up against the established order, the polytheistic religion of the Meccans. Now, some distance away, in the lush lands of Mesopotamia, the Roman emperor is waging war against the local king. It's the kind of conflict that Rome has been waging since the days of Alexander the Great. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, another great power is rising. The Sassanid Empire, also known as the Second Persian Empire, stretches from Central Asia all the way to the Arabian Sea. They've resisted Rome for centuries, and so far they've won. Then in 636 AD, everything changes. At the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, Arab Muslim armies defeat the Persians and seize control of Mesopotamia. Just a few years later, in 642, they strike again and break Persian resistance for good. Within a decade, the 1,000-year-old Persian Empire has fallen. The Arab conquerors are relentless. Fire temples are destroyed, Zoroastrian scriptures are burned, and many Persians are given the choice between conversion or heavy taxation. Some communities flee eastward, giving rise to the Zoroastrian Parsis of India, who survive to this day. Yet conversion is not immediate. For centuries, Persia remains a land divided. Muslims in power, but a population clinging to old beliefs. Eventually, Islam does take root, but not in the way we might expect. Persian culture does not vanish. Instead, it infuses Islam with its own traditions. Under the first great Islamic dynasties, the Umayyads and later the Abbasids, Persian influence is unmistakable. Arab caliphs borrow Persian court ceremonies, Persian administration, and Persian learning. When the Abbasids found their new capital in 762 near ancient Babylon, they named it Baghdad. It would become the heart of an Islamic Golden Age, a beacon of science, literature, and philosophy that built upon centuries of Persian knowledge. The fruits of this fusion are evident everywhere. Persian scholars, poets, and scientists flourished under Islam. They wrote in Arabic, but their heritage is deeply Persian. Algebra, optics, astronomy, and medicine advanced, drawing on Greek, Indian, and Persian traditions alike. The tales of 1001 Nights, with characters like Sinbad and Aladdin, carried echoes of Persian folklore. Religion, too, evolved. While Sunni Islam spread widely, Persia gravitated toward Shia Islam, a split that began over who should succeed the Prophet Muhammad. Over centuries, Iran would become the stronghold of Shiism, setting it apart from the Sunni-majority Muslim world. When the Mongols swept through in the 13th century, they destroyed Baghdad and put an end to the Islamic Golden Age. By then, however, Persian civilization had taken deep root. It survived the conquest of Arab armies, the collapse of two empires, and the destruction of a capital. In fact, it helped shape those very armies, empires, and eventually the capital. So when we talk about the clash of civilizations, we shouldn't just focus on the violence. Sometimes, the result of these clashes is cultural fusion, a new synthesis that reflects multiple heritages. In the case of Persia and Islam, it led to one of the most brilliant eras in world history. By the 13th century, Persia once again faced destruction at the hands of nomadic invaders. Unlike the Medes, Persians, or Parthians of earlier times, the new wave came from far deeper in the steppes of Central Asia. The Mongols, in 1258, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, stormed into Mesopotamia. Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, was burned to the ground. Its great libraries, mosques, and centuries of accumulated knowledge turned to ash. It was the symbolic end of the Islamic Golden Age. Across Persia, cities fell. Populations were slaughtered, and even the ancient Qanot irrigation systems, the lifeblood of Persian agriculture, were destroyed. Yet, as with earlier conquerors, Persia eventually absorbed its invaders. The Mongols established the Ilkhanate, ruling Persia while slowly adopting its religion and culture. Many Ilkhans converted to Islam, often favoring the more mystical traditions of Sufism, which blended easily with their own animist and shamanist past. By the 14th century, the Ilkhanate was thoroughly Persianized, with many of its princes marrying into the former ruling class. Trade revived, the Silk Road flourished once more, and some Mongol rulers even repaired parts of the shattered infrastructure. But Persia's hard-won peace was short-lived. In the late 14th century, a new storm swept across the land. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, lame in one leg but ruthless in ambition, Timur built an empire through terror. His strategy was simple: demand surrender, and if it was denied, unleash total destruction. Entire cities were wiped out, their populations massacred. His campaigns may have killed as many as 17 million people, 5% of the world's population at the time. Timur's armies swept through Persia, ravaging the land and leaving a legacy of death and destruction. Yet, paradoxically, Timur was also a great patron of the arts. From the wealth of conquest, He built magnificent mosques, gardens, and palaces, particularly in his capital at Susa. Poetry, miniature painting, and architecture flourished under his reign, even as rivers of blood financed their beauty. After Timur's death in 1405, his empire fractured quickly. Persia became a battleground for rival Turkoman tribes, splintered and unstable. For the first time in millennia, the Persian heartland was without a strong, unified empire. This chaos paved the way for new movements, not only political but also religious. Out of the turbulence of the 15th century would rise the Safavids, a dynasty that restored Persian unity and identity under the banner of Shia Islam. But for now, the story of Greater Persia has come to an end. Its long and winding tale began thousands of years ago with the rise of the Achaemenid Empire, a realm that stretched from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Over the centuries, its identity shifted and evolved. First, it was the home of the Medes and Persians. Then it was the center of the mighty Parthian Empire. Later still, it became the heartland of the Sasanian kingdom. And finally, it fell under the sway of Islam and the rule of Arab caliphates. Throughout this turbulent history, it remained the hub of a vast network of trade, culture, and politics. The story of Greater Persia is also the story of resilience and adaptation. Time and again, it absorbed and integrated the influences of the outside world. When nomadic horsemen descended from the Eurasian steppes, they were welcomed into the cities and countryside. As merchants, soldiers, and diplomats, they participated in and shaped the very civilization they once threatened. Even the harsh rule of the Mongols couldn't snuff out the Persian flame. Its culture, art, and learning continued to flourish. In literature, poetry, and philosophy, the spirit of Greater Persia endured. The likes of Omar Khayyam and Atta of Nishapur kept the flame of humanism and enlightenment alive during the darkest days of foreign domination. Their works are a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And yet, despite its strength and adaptability, Greater Persia was not immune to the destructive forces of history. Internal divisions and external conflicts took a heavy toll. When the Arab armies arrived, they shattered the old order and imposed a new faith on the people. Although Islam took root, it was a different form than what was practiced in the Arabian Peninsula. Local customs and beliefs influenced the development of Shia Islam, giving it a distinct Persian character. As we conclude our journey through the history of Greater Persia, we are left with a sense of awe and admiration. Awe at the grandeur and magnificence of a civilization that thrived for so many centuries, and admiration for the resilience and adaptability of its people. Greater Persia may no longer exist in its ancient form, but its legacy lives on in the culture, art, and history of the region. The story of Greater Persia is a reminder that civilizations are not static, but rather dynamic and ever-evolving entities. They rise and fall, adapt and change, and ultimately leave their mark on the course of human history. Next episode is the Safavids and the Gunpowder Empires. The year is 1501, and for the first time in several centuries, all of Persia is once again under the rule of a single powerful monarch. Welcome to the course, where we explore the rich history of the Middle East and North Africa from the earliest times to the present day. And you can join us every week for new episodes. In the last episode, we saw how the Turkomangol armies of Timur the Lame conquered much of Persia. Now his empire would soon shatter, but his greatest and most lasting impact was the introduction of gunpowder weapons to Iran. And as we'll see today, the next few centuries will belong to the Persians. After Timur's death, Persia fell into a cycle of civil war and foreign invasions. mainly by the rising Ottoman Turks to the west and the Uzbeks to the east. But out of this chaos emerged a new dynasty, the Safavids, who would transform Iran not only into a unified power but also into the spiritual heartland of Shia Islam. Their founder, Shah Ismail, began as a local chieftain in the northwest, but with the help of a charismatic preacher named Mullah Muhammad Baqir, he united Iran's discontented Shia population under his banner. Baqir combined the popular Sufi mysticism of the region with the theology of Ismaili, an esoteric branch of Shiism. The result was a new form of faith that blended religious duties with ecstatic rituals and attracted a diverse following from merchants to tribal warriors. As Ismail's armies grew, so did his royal title, eventually becoming the Shahanshah, meaning King of Kings. By 1514, he controlled all of Persia, and soon after, Azerbaijan and Armenia. He then turned on the Ottoman ruler, Sultan Selim I, defeating him at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514 and securing Persia's northern borders. To cement his power, Ismail needed to build a strong state. And in this, he was aided by his wife, Princess Gertrude Kam, a convert to Shiism from Bavaria. She set up a meritocratic system in which nobles could keep their rank if they proved worthy, regardless of lineage. This created a powerful ruling class loyal to the crown. But Ismail's most lasting impact was making Shiism the official religion of the empire. This was a stark break from the Sunnis of the surrounding regions, and would give Iran its distinct religious identity for centuries to come. Ismail's successors continued this trend of religious devotion and state building, especially Shah Abbas the Great, who reigned from 1588 to 1629. Under him, Persia reached its greatest territorial extent, controlling much of modern-day Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. Abbas built a powerful army using matchlock, muskets, artillery, and cavalry, all supplied by European gunsmiths. His forces defeated the Ottomans in several major battles and pushed them back from Persian territory. In fact, during this period, Iran, along with the Ottomans and the Mughals, became one of the great gunpowder empires, states that successfully used early modern weaponry to create vast and well-defended realms. Abbas also continued his dynasty's tradition of building great works of art and architecture. After suffering a devastating earthquake in the late 16th century, he decided to rebuild his capital city of Isfahan from scratch. The result was a marvel of the ancient world, full of grand mosques with turquoise domes, bustling bazaars, lush gardens, and bridges over the Zayandeh River. Isfahan became a center of art and learning, and was known throughout the Middle East as half the world, or as the perfect city. Furthermore, Iranian culture flourished during the Safavid period. Its carpets, silk, and miniature paintings were prized exports throughout Europe and Asia. Even today, Iranians remember this age as a golden era, or as the time when Persia was half the world. Abbas also navigated a dangerous geopolitical world. To their west lay the Ottoman Empire, a powerful Sunni rival who coveted Persian lands in Mesopotamia and the Caucasus. The two empires clashed repeatedly over these borderlands, and Abbas fought many wars against them. But he never lost. To counterbalance the Ottomans, Abbas forged alliances with European powers like England and Austria. In 1628, British naval forces even helped the Safavids expel the Portuguese from the Persian Gulf, securing key trade routes for the Iranian merchants. To the east, the Mughal Empire of India was a more distant but often friendlier neighbor, sharing cultural and commercial ties with the Persians. But despite their many accomplishments, the Safavids would ultimately decline. After Abbas's death, a series of weak rulers led to corruption, poor governance and growing external pressures. To the east, Afghan rebels seized large parts of Iran, and to the south, Russians moving down the Caucasus. To the west, the Ottomans seized Persian territories, and in 1722, the dynasty's last Shah was killed, marking the end of the Safavid era. Despite their short reign of only 2 centuries, their impact was profound. They had rebuilt Persia after centuries of chaos, cemented Shi'ism as the core of Iranian identity, and given the world masterpieces of art, architecture, and culture. Most importantly, they were the first truly modern Iranian dynasty, bridging the gap between the medieval and the modern age. Next episode is the Qayyars and European rivalry. By the late 18th century, the Middle East was a very different place from what we know today. The Ottoman Empire was still strong, but to the east, a new power was rising. That's right, it's time to talk about Persia. Okay, class dismissed. Just kidding. You're not going anywhere until you've finished this lesson. By the late 18th century, Persia entered a new chapter. That's because, in 1796, a man named Aga Muhammad Khan seized the throne and founded the new Qayyar dynasty. Now, you might remember Aga Muhammad from an earlier lesson. He was the guy who crushed the Zand dynasty and ended the long civil war. But while he was a brilliant military leader and ruthlessly stamped out rival claimants to the throne, his methods were brutal. He built up a loyal but also terrified army that pillaged across the countryside. In fact, he even went so far as to forcibly relocate many of his opponents to far-off cities like Isfahan and Mashhad. Despite his brutality, Aga Khan was a shrewd judge of the times. He realized that to rule Persia effectively, he needed to bring it together after decades of civil war and foreign incursions. And he did just that. His successors would rule over most of modern-day Iran, though they never fully retook areas like Azerbaijan and Kurdistan, which had fallen to outside powers. But the Qayyars were never really known for making big territorial gains. You see, their rise coincided with the rise of 2 other great imperial powers, Russia and Britain. And the Qayyars found themselves right in the middle. To the north, Russia was expanding rapidly into the Caucasus region. In 1801, they took Georgia, and in 1804, they took the northern part of Armenia. Not only that, but Russian forces pushed deeper into the Caucasus and defeated the Ottoman Empire at the Battle of Karansabas. Soon, they set their sights on Azerbaijan as well. The First Russo-Persian War broke out in 1804 when the Russians advanced through Georgia and forced the Persians to retreat. The Treaty of Gulistan in 1813 ended the war, and it was a disaster for Iran. They lost all of their northern territories, including much of Azerbaijan. The Russians even built a road directly connecting them to the warm waters of the Black Sea. And it didn't stop there. In the 1820s, the Russians began pushing south again. This time, they aimed to annex the rest of Azerbaijan and force the Persians to pay a war indemnity. After defeating the Iranian army at the Battle of Erdubad, the Russians seemed poised to take the entire country, but then the Shah's wife stepped in. She was a Russian convert to Christianity named Princess Likachuri, and she convinced her husband to sue for peace. The Treaty of Turkmenchai in 1828 ended the war and confirmed the loss of all of northern Iran. At this point, the Russians controlled virtually all of the Iranian plateau. But to the east and south, another power loomed large, Great Britain. As the ruler of India, Britain saw Persia as a potential buffer against Russian expansion. At the very least, they wanted to prevent the Russians from linking up with the Ottoman Empire. At the very most, they hoped to annex Persia itself. This rivalry between the two empires is what we historians call the Great Game. And in 1907, The British and Russians decided to settle their differences by dividing Persia into spheres of influence. This was done without any input from the Persian government. The British controlled the south and the east, while the Russians controlled the north. Now, this doesn't mean that either power annexed Persia, but it does mean that the Persian game was now entirely in the hands of foreigners. But wait, there's more. The British and Russians weren't the only outsiders vying for influence in Persia. Basically, they carved up the country's resources and made the ruling elite rich. Speaking of the ruling elite, they were a big problem. The Qajars were generally more interested in luxury goods and ostentatious displays of wealth than they were in actually governing. They appointed family members and friends to key positions, regardless of their ability. The result was widespread corruption. Moreover, the Qajars lagged far behind the rest of Europe in terms of modernization. While the West industrialized and urbanized, Persia remained mostly rural and traditional. Infrastructure was lacking, and the economy was stagnant. In fact, despite their control over the lucrative silk trade, the Qajars couldn't even keep up with the fashion trends of Paris or London. That said, things could have been worse. Despite the discovery of oil in 1908, the Qajars never really took advantage of it. Instead, they allowed foreign-owned companies to siphon off the profits. This, too, contributed to the growth of the reform movement. The Persian constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911 sought to limit the power of the Qajar Shahs and create a parliament with more authority. While the Qajar Shahs eventually crushed the revolution, they couldn't stop the rise of nationalists, reformists, and clerics, who wanted a stronger, more independent Iran. By the early 20th century, then Persia was caught in a dangerous bind. It was weakened internally, pressured externally, and torn between reform and tradition. The Qajars clung to power, but the genie was out of the bottle. A new dynasty was rising that promised to modernize and strengthen Iran. So the last time we talked about Iran, or Persia as it was then known, it was in the midst of constitutional crisis. Now, by the early 20th century, the weakness of the Qajar dynasty left the country vulnerable, not only to foreign powers, but also to internal collapse. Into this turmoil stepped Reza Khan, a military officer who seized control in 1921 with British backing. In 1925, he crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi, thus beginning the Pahlavi dynasty, which would rule Iran until 1979. Now, like Ataturk in Turkey, Reza Shah wanted to transform his nation into a strong, centralized, and independent state. And so he embarked on a bold program of modernization and secularization. He built railways, schools, and factories. He curbed the power of tribal leaders and clerics, promoted a modern army, and pushed for industrial development. He even targeted clothing as a symbol of social change. Traditional garments were discouraged, while Western-style dress was encouraged as a symbol of progress. Yet modernization came at a cost. Reza Shah ruled with an iron fist. Political dissent was crushed, opposition silenced, and democracy stifled. Corruption thrived, and his rapid reforms alienated much of his country's traditional and devout population. Additionally, during World War II, Iran's strategic location and vast oil reserves caught foreign attention. Though officially neutral, Reza Shah leaned toward Germany. This prompted Britain and the Soviet Union to invade in 1941. They overthrew Reza Shah, forcing him to abdicate in favor of his young son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. Now the new Shah initially faced challenges from nationalist movements and a parliament which demanded greater independence from both Britain and the Soviets. But by the mid-1940s, The foreign powers had withdrawn, and the grateful Iranians hailed the Shah as a national hero. However, the relationship between the crown and the people soon turned sour. In the early 1950s, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh boldly sought to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which was dominated by British companies. This move angered London and Washington, and in 1953, the CIA and MI6 backed a coup which toppled Mossadegh and restored the Shah's authority. Though this ensured the Shah's survival, it left deep scars of resentment toward the West. But with oil revenues rising, Mohammad Reza Shah ambitiously pursued a modernization plan known as the White Revolution. Iran's cities grew rapidly, and its military became one of the most powerful in the region. Yet prosperity was uneven. Rural poverty persisted, corruption spread, and political repression deepened under the Shah's secret police. The push for westernization alienated many Iranians, especially the clergy and traditional classes. By the 1970s, Iran seemed wealthy and powerful, but beneath the surface, discontent was growing. The Shah's authoritarianism, coupled with resentment toward foreign interference and cultural change, created a perfect storm that would soon sweep his dynasty away. Okay, now it's time for some review time. So here's what you need to know. First, the Pahlavi dynasty came to power in 1925, with Reza Khan as Reza Shah Pahlavi, and lasted until 1979. Second, Reza Shah's modernization program included ambitious projects in infrastructure, education, and industry, but it also involved the suppression of traditional power structures and culture. Third, Iran experienced a coup in 1953 that toppled Prime Minister Mossadegh and reaffirmed the Shah's authority with the support of the United States and Great Britain. By the late 1970s, Iran under Mohammad Reza Shah appeared to be a modernizing, oil-rich nation, a showcase of Western-style development in the heart of the Middle East. But beneath the glittering surface of wealth and power, discontent was boiling over. Corruption, inequality, political repression, and the Shah's relentless drive to westernize society alienated broad segments of the population. The clergy, students, workers, and even parts of the middle class turned against him. Then, in 1978, it all blew up. Protests against the Shah spread across the country. What began as demonstrations quickly escalated into a mass movement. Strikes paralyzed the economy, and hundreds of thousands marched in the streets, chanting death to the Shah. The once seemingly invincible monarch was now on the run. Weakened by illness and abandoned by his foreign allies, he fled Iran on January 16, 1979. Into the vacuum stepped Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a Shia cleric who had long opposed the Shah from exile. Returning to Tehran in triumph, Khomeini, who'd been sentenced to death by the Shah, transformed the revolution into an Islamic one. On April 1, 1979, the monarchy was abolished, and Iran was declared an Islamic republic. A new constitution enshrined clerical authority, with Khomeini as supreme leader. The revolution was complete. It was a stunning and shocking development. For the first time in modern history, a theocratic state replaced a pro-Western monarchy. Iran's new leaders sought to purge Western influence, reject secularism, and build a society based on Shia Islamic principles. The revolution inspired emulation across the Muslim world, while simultaneously triggering fear among Iran's neighbors. For the latter, the rise of an Islamic fundamentalist state posed a dangerous challenge to regional stability. Nowhere was this fear more evident than in Iraq. Led by the ruthless dictator Saddam Hussein, Iraq saw an opportunity to crush Iran's nascent revolutionary regime. In 1980, Saddam launched a full-scale invasion of Iran, hoping to seize oil-rich territories and eliminate the new Islamic Republic before it consolidated power. Thus began the Iran-Iraq War, a brutal 8-year conflict that would define Iran's early years as a revolutionary state. Yet, despite the war and its many challenges, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 remains one of the most consequential events of the late 20th century. It shattered the myth of Western supremacy and demonstrated the power of religious ideas to mobilize populations and shape geopolitics. In many ways, the 1979 revolution was a culmination of long-standing tensions within Iran. For decades, the country's large and influential clergy had chafed under the Shah's Western-oriented reforms, which they saw as a threat to traditional values and their own power. The Shah, in turn, viewed the clergy as a reactionary force that opposed his modernization efforts. This growing divide set the stage for the revolution, which ultimately resulted in the establishment of the world's first Islamic Republic. The revolution's impact extended far beyond Iran's borders. It inspired similar movements across the Muslim world and demonstrated the viability of Islamic fundamentalism as a political force. At the same time, the revolution heightened tensions between Iran and the West, culminating in the 1979 seizure of the US Embassy in Tehran and the subsequent hostage crisis. This event cemented Iran's break with the United States and symbolized its defiance of Western power. Moreover, the revolution had profound social and cultural consequences. It led to the imposition of strict Islamic laws and customs and the suppression of Western influences such as cinema and music. These changes were deeply divisive, creating a sharp divide between those who supported the new regime and those who opposed it. Despite its revolutionary rhetoric, however, the new Islamic Republic faced significant challenges, both from within and without. The Iran-Iraq War, triggered by Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran, proved to be a costly and divisive conflict that drained the country's resources and manpower. Internally, the regime faced opposition from various groups, including monarchists, liberals, and ethnic minorities, who were unhappy with the strict Islamic laws and restrictions imposed by the new regime. Nonetheless, the 1979 revolution remains a pivotal moment in Iranian history. It ended 2,500 years of monarchy in Persia and replaced it with a unique experiment, a theocracy in the modern age. For its supporters, it was a rebirth of Islamic values and a rejection of Western imperialism. For its opponents, it marked the rise of repression under the banner of religion. Either way, it reshaped not only Iran, but the entire Middle East. What are your thoughts? How did the Iranian Revolution impact the course of Middle Eastern history? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for watching. From the mountains of Elam to the vast empire of Cyrus the Great, from the brilliance of Persepolis to the resilience of the Islamic Republic, Persia's story stretches across 5 millennia of human history. Few civilizations have endured so long, and fewer still have left such a profound imprint on the world. Persia gave us administrative innovations like the satrap system, networks of roads and couriers that connected continents, and hydraulic engineering that made deserts bloom. Its philosophers and prophets, from Zoroaster to the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, shaped how humanity thought about morality, faith, and the universe. Its conquerors, Cyrus, Darius, and later Alexander, redefined what empires could be, not only through war but through law, tolerance, and cultural exchange. Even when foreign armies swept through, Persia did not disappear. Instead, it absorbed, adapted, and transformed its conquerors, preserving its essence across ages. The arts and culture of Persiates, carpets, poetry, music, and architecture still inspire wonder. From the verses of Hafez and Rumi to the domes of Isfahan, Persian creativity resonates far beyond its borders. Even in moments of decline and conquest, Persian identity never faded. In the modern era, Iran stands as the successor of this legacy. A nation both ancient and modern, proud of its cultural heritage, yet still navigating its place in a changing world. Its history is not only one of power and empire, but of resilience, adaptation, and continuity. Persia's story reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, but ideas endure. The Persian vision of governance, culture, and spirituality continues to echo across the Middle East, across the world, and across time. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 3,000 years of Persian history. Each king, each conqueror, each sage has a tale to tell. And now their stories are shared with you. I hope this series has ignited your curiosity as it did for me. When I first embarked on this project, I wanted to understand not just the rise and fall of empires, but the essence of a civilization, its spirit. I've delved into the lives of ordinary people, the decisions they made, the challenges they faced. I've marveled at the innovations they brought to life and the values they held dear. I've witnessed the ebb and flow of power, the clash of cultures, the relentless march of time, and yet through it all, there's a thread of continuity that has amazed me. The story of Persia is not just about war and conquest, though those moments are epic and dramatic. It's also about peace, about building, about creating. It's about a people who, despite the many threads that wove into their tapestry, remained remarkably resilient and persistent. I've seen it in the ruins of Pasargadae, the grandeur of Persepolis, the elegance of Isfahan, and the spirit of Tehran. I've heard it in the verses of Omar Khayyam, Ferdowsi, and Rumi, and I've felt it in the vibrant heart of 1,000 bazaars. Now, as we reach the end of this series, I invite you to join me in looking ahead. Let the legacy of Persia, its achievements, its struggles, and its triumphs, serve as a reminder and inspiration for us all. Let its story be a testament to the power of human endeavor, creativity, and the enduring spirit of a civilization that not only survived, but thrived across the sands of time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May the spirit of Persia continue to inspire us all. And until our paths cross again, may you find wisdom in the words of Omar Khayyam, courage in the tales of the warriors, and beauty in the art and poetry of this timeless land.